Today I wanted to talk to you about flexible fountain pens. What is a flexible fountain pen? Well, if you're not familiar, a flexible fountain pen is a pen with a flexible nib that allows for line variation. So if I want to go light with a flexible fountain pen, I can, if I want to make a thin line. But if I start pressing down, I can get a thicker line, which gives you a lot more expression. So having a pen with line variation, I think, is really important for artists. You don't want to have a monotonous line that's the same all the way through. You want to be able to emphasize shadows, emphasize distance, closeness, lots of different reasons why you might want to vary a line. The main reason why you would is because varying lines are more expressive. So, I've been drawing for a really long time, and my drawing material of choice has been always the dip pen. Why? Lots of advantages. Well, dip pens, first of all, are really inexpensive as opposed to many fountain pens. They're flexible, which allows for a lot of line variation. You can switch out the nibs, you can very easily clean them, switch out inks, not that I ever do. And for decades, really, for however many decades I've been drawing, I've been kind of avoiding fountain pens. Why? Because most of them, the ones I experienced anyway, have stiff nibs. So this pen is a really nice pen. It's one of my favorite. This is a Twsbi Echo. However, I am able to tease out a little bit of line variation, not all that much. It's fairly stiff. And this is kind of off-putting because with a dip nib, line variation was a given. You assumed that you could get it. I really don't know of any metal nibs for dip pens that are stiff. Whereas with fountain pens, that's very, very common. In fact, the majority of modern fountain pens do not allow for any line variation at all. So I've been drawing with a dip nib for a very long time. Didn't miss out, didn't feel like I was missing anything, and then suddenly realized, wait a minute, there is such a thing as a flexible fountain pen, a fountain pen with a flexible nib. And I think the first pen that I discovered with a flexible nib was this one. This is a Noodlers Ahab. It's a really nice pen. Again, I think this is one of the first or second pens that I've bought. And it has a really flexible nib. Now, the nib on this Ahab is no longer made by Noodlers. I switched it out. So this is a Noodlers Ahab. This is a really cheap, inexpensive pen for flex. But it's made even better with a nib from a company called Fountain Pen Revolution. So I'll have the links for where you can buy Noodlers and where you can buy this particular nib. But this combination of Noodlers with a nib from Fountain Pen Revolution, this is their ultra-flex nibs, work incredibly well and give you really tremendous flexibility. The good thing about Noodlers is because these pens were designed for flexible nibs, they have feeds. Feeds are these ebonite dark rubber sections that provide enough ink to feed this ink-hungry nib. If I tried taking this nib and putting it into a regular fountain pen, these nibs are different sizes. I'm not going to be able to put this nib in this one, but if I could, the plastic feed here wouldn't be able to keep up and the pen would run really dry. So the good thing about these Noodlers is that the feeds keep up, and these nibs are number 6 nibs, which allow you a lot of different options for switching out. So this is my first recommendation for really inexpensive flex. Noodlers Ahab, which runs probably, I'm going to say $25 to $30, with a Fountain Pen Revolution nib. This is their number 6 ultra-flex-nib. I believe this is an extra fine. Actually, it might be fine. They just started releasing an extra fine, which is a little bit thinner. This has really, really, really nice flex, as nice as some of the more expensive pens that I have. Noodlers, Ahab. You can also buy the Conrad. It's a very similar pen with a similar sized nib. And then the Fountain Pen Revolution Ultra Flex nib. That's my first recommendation for flex pens. What else? Well, so this Fountain Pen Revolution, they also make their own pens. This is their Himalaya 2. It has their Ultra Flex nib in it. However, I found that the quality of the pens themselves has not really lived up to snuff. These pens run a little bit dry. the build quality is not great on these. It feels a little bit flimsy. Gosh, I really love the company. I love their nibs. However, this particular pen I just can't recommend. Even though it was designed for this particular nib, the feed just doesn't often keep up. So you can see how this pen runs dry. I need to tap it a little bit. I need to shake it out a little bit for it to get going again. So these nibs work much better, unfortunately, in the Ahabs than they do in their own proprietary pens. So I've been buying their nibs, and I've been looking for other pens in which I can stick them into. Again, the difficulty is that the pen has to have a feed that is designed for flexible writing. The Ahab has it, and not a lot of other pens do. However, there is one glaring, gleaming, wonderful exception. This is a number 5. It's a slightly smaller nib. Number 5 Fountain Pen Revolution nib in a Twsbi 580 pen. So the original nib in here is not flexible, and you would think that the feed would not be designed to keep up with the amount of ink needed for a flexible pen, yet it does. So I tried it, and now I have a really nice Twsbi pen. Twsbis have really good build quality. This is a piston filler, which I really like. And really, in terms of build quality, it's much nicer than the Ahab. Both are really durable, but like this is actually a pretty pen. This one, I'm not quite so sure. I like it, and look, I don't really care about aesthetics all that much, but this pen is really nice to write with, nice to draw with, which is mostly what I do with them. I don't write with them. It's got tremendous ink capacity. So this is a Twsbi 580 with a Fountain Pen Revolution number 5 ultra-flex-nib. I don't know why, but for some reason this nib with this feed combination works, whereas I've tried to put other flexible pens, other flexible nibs into Twsbi pens, more specifically a number 6 nib into their 700, into the Twsbi 700R, and the feed just couldn't keep up. It just wouldn't work. This does though, so this is really highly recommended. This pen itself ran, okay, it's about $60, and the nib was $15, $17. For the price, you'll find that this is actually a very affordable, flexible pen option. So we're kind of going up in price. The Ahab plus the nib, we're running into $40-something. The Twsbi 580L plus the nib, we're dealing kind of in the $70 to $80 range, working our way up. My next flexible option is considerably more expensive. I get these pens confused often. This is a Pilot Falcon. This pen runs probably about $150. And this is something you really can't find used on eBay. For some reason, people don't want to sell them. They're just really highly sought after pens because, look, they draw really well. And those artists that do know about fountain pens and like to draw with them, you'll find quite often that this pen is in their fountain pen collection. Now, it doesn't go quite as flexible as these two Fountain Pen Revolution pens. It has a gold nib, but it's more semi-flex than flex. But how much line variation do you really need when you're drawing? That's the question. Do I really need this much line variety? Look, I might. It's good to have if I need it, but most often this is going to cover most of my needs, right? So I can go for a fine line here, and then if I want to emphasize a line, I can go in and get something a little bit heavier. For most drawing needs, this is just about as much flexibility as you want. So this is a Pilot Falcon. I believe this is a fine. Look, I prefer extra fine nibs, but this one, because it's a Japanese nib, is pretty fine. So one thing to recognize is something that everybody says. Japanese nibs tend to run a little bit finer than Western nibs. This is a really great pen. There's a couple of disadvantages to it. So first of all, look, the flex is... Some people wouldn't even call it flex. They would call it what's called a soft nib, a nib with a little bit of bounce in it. So compared to other flexible options, maybe it's not even flex at all. It's more like a little bit softer. The one thing I really don't like about it is the fact that it's got a really crappy converter that holds a little tiny amount of ink. So if I'm traveling with this pen, I should be carrying cartridges, which in the pilot range have a limited number of colors. This pen runs out of ink really, really quickly. Because it's opaque, it's really hard to keep track how much ink is in it. And this is, I forget, the Con 40 converter by Pilot. It's their crappiest converter, and I really don't like it. Look, flexible pens eat up a lot of ink. So even this semi-flex pretty quickly goes through ink much faster than a regular stiff nib. So really, when you're looking for a fountain pen, having really good ink capacity, which the Twsbi 580 does, which my Ahab does, being able to see how much ink is in it, what color ink is in it, though usually I work with black, is a huge advantage. So the fact that this has little tiny ink capacity is really the only disadvantage in the pen. Otherwise, it's a beautiful writer. The line quality is really, really nice. It's really smooth. The build quality is great. I mean, this thing is really solid. There is, personally, I think, a better Pilot option. It's a little bit hard to find sometimes, and it's more expensive sometimes. This is a Pilot Custom Heritage 912. It's actually not sold in the US. You have to order directly from Japan. But you can get deals on this. So I bought this one, I believe, slightly, what they call gently used, for around $130. I've looked at eBay. They're still around for that price. You can find something maybe around $160 right now. This one has not a Falcon, it's called an FA. It gets kind of confusing, but this is a nib with the shoulders cut out. It also has really long tines, which gives it flexibility. So as opposed to the Pilot Falcon, which is, I would call semi-flex or soft, this is a true flex pen. This is a really beautifully writing pen. The line variation is really, really great. It doesn't gush quite as much ink as the Ahab with the Fountain Pen Revolution nib does, though it's much wetter than, I think, the Twsbi 580 with the flex nib. It's very, very smooth. What else can I say about it? Really great pen. Unfortunately, new, this pen could run up to $200. You should definitely buy it used if you can. Don't buy it new. This one is in perfect condition. I got really lucky. The other advantage is that it has a much better converter. It's a larger pen, which fits this Con 70 converter with a push, like a pump filler feature. It holds a fair amount of ink, enough for most purposes. The one thing I just remembered, the one thing, however, when you do buy this pen, it comes with a plastic feed, which kind of mostly keeps up. I believe these things were initially designed for Asian calligraphy, for Japanese calligraphy, which uses a lot of shorter strokes. It's not designed for Western calligraphy, which uses lots of long continuous lines. So when I first bought this pen, it actually railroaded. Railroading means that the ink splits, dries up a little bit, and creates this kind of railroad effect. That was really easily solved. There's a company called Flex-Nib Factory, and they sell ebonite feeds for lots of different pens, but specifically this Pilot Custom 912. So for, I believe, under $20, it was probably even less, I bought an ebonite feed, which gave me enough ink capacity so that this ink never railroaded. So this is a Pilot 912, and it's been supercharged, turbocharged, with an ebonite feed from this flexnibfactory.com. Excuse me, man. It's a really good website. I bought some flexible nibs from there. I would definitely go there, and I'm gonna post all these links for you guys. They also offer a lot of flexible nibs options. They sell Indian nibs that are kind of similar in performance to the Fountain Pen Revolution, though a little bit stiffer, perhaps not quite as flexible, not quite as nice. That's my personal opinion. All right, so we're moving up in price a little bit and going into vintage flex. So back in the day, and I would say back in the day meaning starting from, let's say, 1910 to 1920, all the way up to 1930, 1940. A lot of manufacturers, a lot of fountain pen manufacturers manufactured pens with flexible nibs. They actually outperform most of the modern flexible nibs today. However, it's really hard for me to advise you what kind of flexible vintage nibs to buy. Each flexible nib you buy is going to be a little bit different. There was a huge amount of variety of different kinds of nibs, ranging from soft to semi-flex to flex to something called a wet noodle, which is a really sensitive pen with huge line variation that probably is not particularly good for drawing, or might be a little bit too difficult for most untrained hands to control. However, I can make a few vintage recommendations. These are pens that are consistently flexible for the most part, and on the inexpensive side as far as vintage goes. My first recommendation are two German pens. These are both semi-flex. These pens were both manufactured in the 50s. This is a Montblanc 342G. Montblanc 342G. It's a, I think it was kind of on the lower end of Montblancs at the time. It might even be considered like a Montblanc student pen. It's got a gold nib, number 2, hence the 342. Its build quality is excellent. There's a little blue ink window in here. That's probably a little bit hard to see. And it has some really nice flexibility to it. Again, I would call this more semi-flex, equivalent to the Pilot Falcon, maybe a little bit wider. Really excellently performing pen. The balance on it is fantastic. The fact that it's a piston filler with a lot of ink capacity gives it a leg up on the Pilot Falcon. And it was cheaper, slightly cheaper than the Pilot Falcon. I believe I bought this for $120. There's lots of these available. Not a lot in the US. You might have to scour the German fountain pen websites to grab one. I'm really happy with this pen. This is the Montblanc 342G. The other excellent German pen that has a semi-flexible nib in it is this Pelikan 144. I believe, or yeah, 144. Okay, I'll correct myself if I'm wrong in the comments section. This is another piston filler. It's a really pretty pen. Not that I care that much. What I do care about is the fact that it has a really nice semi-flex nib in it. Now, this is supposed to be a fine. It actually probably is more of a medium for me. Like really excellent line variation. This pen also ran maybe $110 if I'm not mistaken. And I bought it from a really good website. I think it was called The Penguin. Shout out. I'll post a link on the bottom. This dealer, I think, deals almost exclusively with Pelikan pens. Did I call this a Penguin? I think, yeah, I think I may have. This is a Pelikan pen. And he sells a range. There's some more expensive pens, obviously, but this is kind of like a workhorse student pen from the 50s, the 140 NN, with a semi-flexible nib. He always has these pens available, from what I understand, and they're just really, really good. All right, so then I have two American pens to recommend. Waterman. Waterman is famous for producing absolutely excellent flexible pens. They can be expensive. From what I understand, these are sort of the premium pens of the time, and they still are. They're still highly collected. Anytime any one of these pens is for sale, there's an immediate bidding war. Waterman pens can sell for thousands of dollars, and even a normal pen like this could run into the hundreds. However, this is one of their lower lines of pens. This is a Waterman 52. And this is the pen I recommend if somebody wants to get into flexible pens and is looking at vintage. The Waterman 52. It's got a wonderful flexible nib on it. The problem, again, with vintage is that every time you buy a pen, it's going to perform a little bit differently. Look, it's an old pen. I guess the way it was used over time. And then I guess the manufacturing process changed a little bit every couple of years, possibly. Vintage is a very complicated subject. This is the most flexible pen I own, though. It's perfectly smooth. It puts down just the right amount of ink. It's really fine. It has the capacity to do extra fine lines and really thick lines. I do have a pen, another Waterman, that I'm not going to show you. It performs as well. However, it's even softer, and I found that it's difficult for me to control. So maybe I need to practice a little bit with it. But I'm finding it kind of hard to not flex the pen. I have to hold my hand really far away and really, really control the pressure. So this one for me is just perfect. Without any pressure at all, it writes thin, and then I don't have to press down that much to get a thicker line, but enough that I can control it. So this is a Waterman 52. I strongly recommend this one. Here's another one that I bought recently that I also really enjoy. Not quite as flexible as this one, but this is a Wall Eversharp Gold Seal. It also has a flexible nib, also performing very similar to the Waterman. Maybe not quite as flexible, but also really, really wonderful. And this one again was maybe $130. Look, giving you prices for vintage pens, that's really difficult because you might get into a bidding war. It depends not really on the writing experience or the drawing experience, but on the condition of the pen, the hardware, how well preserved the imprint is. This one's a little bit stained, so that possibly contributed to the price going down a little bit. Personally, I don't care. Look, I like drawing with pretty pens, but I prefer to draw with ugly pens every single time, so long as they perform really, really well. So there are some options for you. I'm going to list them, their names, in the comments section. Not the comments section, the thing down below. So here are two vintage options. Both these pens are from the 20s, if I believe, if I'm not mistaken. We've got some German pens here from the 50s, my Mont Blanc, my Pelican. Then, going cheaper into modern flex. This takes a little bit of work. You have to order a couple of different components, but we have a Twsbi 580 with a flex nib, and then, oh, I forgot about the pilots. We'll put them in. Okay, so we've got the Ahab with another flex nib. Both of these nibs are from Fountain Pen Revolution. And then we have our two pilots, the Pilot Falcon and the Pilot 912 with an FA nib, and a customization, a ebonite feed from Flex Nib Factory. All right, I think that's it for the demo right now. Maybe I'll do separate demos, separate reviews of these pens individually. But look, as an artist, I think it's really important to explore the world of flexible nib fountain pens because, again, line variation I think is a really important aspect in drawing with pen. It's something I've always enjoyed when working with a dip pen. And look, over time, I've realized that flexibility isn't everything, so I do have a range of fountain pens with relatively stiff nibs, though this one you can, again, tease out a little bit of line variation, so it's not completely stiff. But they serve a purpose. So anytime you're doing any kind of like really fine cross-hatching where you want the line consistency to be perfect. That said, for studio work, the dip pen wins every single time. I still use the dip pen mostly for my illustration work. You really can't beat it. But if you're sketching, which is something that I'm doing more and more nowadays, if I'm traveling with my pens, which I do a lot nowadays, having a flexible nib fountain pen, I think, would be to your benefit.